Welcome to In the Cool of the Day, and I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Sharon Anderson, and this is your segment from Behind the Podium, Conversations about Law and Faith. And our topic of discussion today is domestic violence and corporal punishment and the social media impact that it's had on our culture. And with me, I have a very special guest, Edward Trey Johnson, former offensive lineman of the Washington Redskins and sports legendary. How are you today, Trey?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
It's also my cousin, and I'm really proud to say that. So, Trey, I asked you on because our program from Behind the Podium discusses the intersection between law and faith. Mm-hmm. And the issue of domestic violence in sports media and the media's attraction and attention on domestic violence as it relates to sports figures has really caught my attention. And I wanted to discuss that with you today. And looking at some statistics, it says that the global sports culture has a domestic violence problem that needs to end. The global sports culture, do you agree with that?
I'm not going to disagree with it. I'm sure the global sports culture does have a problem with domestic violence. Domestic violence is a huge problem, but I think it's a global problem, not just a global sports problem. I think it's a worldwide problem, but I think sports and sports entities get a lot of the focus and attention because it sells more. I think you can send a better message and have a more impactful connection to people with the severity of domestic violence based on the fact that you can use a professional athlete that has that notoriety to bring your message home.
Right. So recently we've heard about the Ray Rice incident. We've heard about the Adrian Peterson incident. We've heard about the Oscar Pistorius incident, and the media has really, really for lack of a better word, glamorized it. And I think that some of the comments is that when you're in a sport where violence is acceptable, then it spills over into family life and home life. So you have two major football players, right? Adrian Peterson and Ray Rice, and they're concerned. I think the global concern, even in the area of rugby, is that the more violent the sport, the more likelihood that the player is not going to be able to turn it off, so to speak. Now, you were an offensive lineman. I mean, you played from '94 to '03. Great career, as I said, a sports legend. Do you feel that that's an issue that the NFL or the World Cup, whether it be rugby or soccer, should address, helping players to turn it on or turn it off?
I mean, ideally, that would be a great concept to be able to turn it on and turn it off. I think it's a lot harder to do. I think some of the best athletes who've been playing from early childhood it's been kind of, beaten into them, that, to be dominant, to be physically aggressive, to destroy another person is your job. You're glorified for it. You see it in the media. They're never showing the kindness of a guy shaking a guy's hand after a game or some of the charitable work. It's always the big hits, the conflictual plays. These are the things that you see being, exemplified in these mediums. So everybody wants to be that. You want to be the biggest, baddest, roughest cat out, and that's what we're taught to do. And those people who are successful at it, I don't think you can play at it. I think it's something you have to internalize like anything else. You have to totally commit to it. And then once you, kind of transition back into society, it's obviously unacceptable behavior to be able to, throw hands with somebody to settle disputes anymore. You have to, go more amicable means, but it's definitely hard. I think we're probably all pretty ill-tempered and physical, and we're used to proving that we're right physically instead of, having the, we agree to disagree attitude. So I definitely, speaking from personal experience, it's an everyday advocacy in terms of, not only living it, but preaching it.
And then I'm assuming most sports players like yourself, whether it's a football player, basketball player, baseball player, you've played since you were a baby. And that's how you trained to get to where you were, to be a sports legend. So it's something that becomes ingrained in you. And do you think that the NFL, let's just say the NFL is looking at it as a problem and then looking at ways to address it?
I don't think yet. They're not doing it yet. Maybe that's why, and I think that's why these incidents that you spoke of concerning Adrian Peterson and Ray Rice are being, so spotlighted. They're being utilized as vehicles for certain organizations to enlighten and outrage and gain support concerning these issues that are socially unacceptable and they're problematic. And I think they're utilizing these athletes as their Trojan horse to get in there and really open the eyes and reach the people who are millions and millions of other people who are doing these things are not getting the notoriety that the athletes are getting. I don't think that the NFL or any sports organization is addressing it as the problem that it is. In some cases, it's even medically linked. These are psychological conditions or other forms of behavior that's been ingrained into these individuals, and they're not treating it like that. Either they're trying to sweep it under the rug if they can, or when they have to make an example of it, they cut ties with that person and leave them out to address without getting that particular individual the help needed to overcome whatever that problematic situation is. So I don't think it's where it should be, but I do think maybe one of the positive. If there's a positive that can come out of these events that you mentioned, would be the attention that that they're gaining.
That I think was, as a pastor, one of the problems that I've had as a lawyer. We know that there are legal issues here. It's assault is assault. Oscar Pistorius was charged with murder and found guilty of murder. And the corporal punishment issue, goes, I think, a couple of ways depending upon who you talk to, but it certainly can be seen as child abuse, whether it's civil abuse or rises to the level of criminal assault on a child. But the issue that I had as a pastor was, if a lawyer beats his wife, he doesn't lose his job. If he might, but the focus is not necessarily on destroying the family, destroying the livelihood, and creating another problem. The target or the focus is getting to the root of the problem. So if he's abusing drugs, or if he's beating his wife, or if he's not caring for his children, which could affect a firm or the reputation of a firm, they focus on getting them help, right? So why do you think it's different for the NFL player?
I mean, like we kind of touched upon earlier, I think it's different because when you have someone with a certain level of fame and notoriety, you have an opportunity to blow up whatever that topic that they're related to, to gigantic proportions. And I think, at least from what I've seen, more so from the Ray Rice thing, early on, when the second video came out, I think that a lot of groups, domestic violence advocacy groups or advocacy against it, came out and they piggybacked. You saw TV commercials, internet commercials. It went wild, and rightfully so. I mean, there are instances where I think we could be more enlightened in terms of some cultural insensitivities if the right event comes out, things like that. I remember things like when the OJ trial came out, it raised issues about black and white in the legal system. So it's not a new concept. I think this is the latest concept where hopefully people are trying to utilize it in a positive way to bring attention to a negative occurrence. Now, like you said, though, it's a shame that it takes these people to commit these types of acts before people really start taking notice. But I think that's just the way the nature of society is right now.
And it's a double standard. And if you're a sports figure and you make this mistake, and I'm not supporting domestic violence, I'm not supporting corporal punishment, but if you make a mistake, whether it's alcohol related, whether again it's an emotional issue, instead of them focusing on how can we help this person, they focus more on how can we punish this person. And while punishment is legitimate and a legitimate form of sanction for a brutal crime, we don't want it repeated. And so what you end up doing, in my view, is you suspend him for a year, you take away his pay, which is going to affect his family, and then he's coming back. 9 times out of 10, right? They're good players, they're coming back, but you haven't really helped them address the issue, nor have you helped others that may have witnessed it in the media, even if they're players, resolve within themselves how to address the issue. So what would you say to that?
I mean, I think it's a great point. I mean, like I say, you definitely have to acknowledge the wrongdoing and address it. However, society or laws or whatever the social mores are concerning it. But, to help that person, to help that family. I mean, because not only are you taking away his livelihood, but possibly the family's livelihood as well. In the case of Ray Rice, I know they had the incident and then they got married. So. Which is what it is. But then they I think they did a 2-game suspension and then they suspended him. I guess he has a lifetime ban right now that in all likelihood will probably be appealed and you said he'll be back. But I think that people are just waiting in the wings to pounce on somebody like that. And I think in the way it's done, depending on how you identify with the incident, I think it causes a divide in some cases.
Absolutely.
People start picking sides, whether it's, men picking sides for men, people of color, feeling like this incident is exemplified because it's a black athlete or, whoever it is, whatever it is, And then you have people on the other side, women who are like, I'm tired of this type of treatment and all these types of things. But, domestic, no athlete or group of athletes have cornered the market on domestic violence or abuse. And to put that out there statistically is wrong because there's so few professional athletes in relation to the world population where in some cultures this is an accepted practice. So I definitely think you need to put it into perspective once again, not condoning it, never let it go. But like you said, I don't know if a lawyer is going to lose his or her position without going through due process and allowing the person to get help and address it through without the court of social opinion or public opinion.
Exactly. Well, this is an interesting discussion. As we said, we're not condoning domestic violence. We're not condoning corporal punishment. But the issue on how to address, rehabilitate, and support these athletes, I think, is a very important one for us to discuss, not only from the legal perspective, but from the spiritual perspective. And stay tuned because we're going to be right back and discuss it some more. From Behind the Podium, conversations about law and faith.
Dinner makes a difference. Learn more at CasaFamilyDay.org.
Welcome back to From Behind the Podium, conversations about law and faith. And we're having an interesting discussion with Edward Trey Johnson, former player for the Redskins. And we've been discussing the impact that this whole domestic violence situation recently with Adrian Peterson and Ray Lewis and Oscar Pistorius and some others have had on just the global view of domestic violence in sports culture. And one of the things we were talking about is just the stigma that's been generated because of these 3 incidents, and how there's a double standard, so to speak, between what happens, say, to lawyers or maybe doctors and what happens with those that are in the media. Let's talk a little bit more about rehabilitation and some of the things that you think could be in place for those in the sports arena that have had these issues and have had these problems and could really help promote rehabilitation as opposed to punishment.
Well, I mean, I think there are definitely some philosophies. 2014, 21st century, there are a lot of, I think, philosophical difference maybe going back as far as child rearing. I mean, I think a lot of it, I know I took a great deal of whoopings as a kid coming up. You know, we were beat every time you messed up, you caught a whooping. I think that goes back subliminally and subconsciously to slavery. You know, we were beaten to produce and work in certain, you know, capacities. And I think that was passed down, you know, post-emancipation that is, you know, kind of seeped into, especially people of color, maybe our foundations for how we structure disciplinary practices with our kids. And then you put the macho into it where, you know, I know catching whoopings early on, you know, as an early age, I wasn't afraid of being hit, and I'm not afraid to hit, you know, and it makes you more prepared for physical contact. I would say that. My father had me boxing from the time I was 8, and we were always, you know, you knew you were going to mix it up at some point in time, and then when you got good at it, you look forward to it. I look forward to the opportunity to prove to, you know, the people watching, the girls, that, you know, I am the baddest man walking campus right now, you know, line forms behind me if you want to survive, you know. So that was a mentality that I took into the athletics and took into my daily life. And, you know, as you're older now and you're in these social circles where it's not necessarily appropriate, it's extremely hard to turn that volume down and go ahead and you know, run amongst the common folks. So I think the rehabilitation has to go back that far. You know, it has to go back to the point where, hey, when you discipline your kids, maybe you can't be saved, but if you, you know, can kind of pull it back off your shoulders so the process kind of stops, it starts there. Then I think, you know, if you do get caught up in that cycle going forward, you provide alternatives. You know, I think a lot of people, I know my friends and I laughed about the whole timeout concept. That was a concept we didn't embrace when we had kids. Like, timeout? You're just gonna sit over there? Like, what kid is gonna fear that? But, you know, but you can take a phone away now. You know, when they get a little older, you can take things away that they truly think they love and value, and probably, you know, solicit too much in their daily lives. So there are other strategies, and I think the rehabilitation is all about, rehab's all about options. Giving alternative strategies to approach certain problematic situations so you can improve. And I think that it's not been a focus, at least I'll say from the football NFL standpoint, it's never really emphasized other than maybe a meeting or two at the beginning of the season. You know, hey man, you can't hit the women. You know, that's pretty much it. You be like, you know, got it, coach, you know, we're gone, you know, and then now let's go get on to what we're doing on the field and hit and beat each other to death. So, you know, it's kind of an oxymoronic philosophy, you know, a contradiction in practice anyway. But I think the rehabilitation has to start before you get to the sport, before you get into competition.
Or even, you know, at the Pop Warner level or at the college level. And as you said, something more meaningful, it sounds like, you know, you have a meeting, 1 or 2. Did you ever have any meetings? You played for Temple, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so did you have meetings about domestic violence and assault in college?
The meetings didn't necessarily emphasize domestic violence. That didn't seem to be too much of a problem, but it was definitely more towards the drug thing. I'm sorry. And the rape thing, you know what I mean? So, you know, rape was a big deal as far as sexual assault, things like that. Nobody was really married, so I don't know if you call it domestic violence, but it definitely, you know, the sexual assaults, the rapes were always given to us. You know, we had like 2 big meetings a year with certain professionals who were brought in, and they were theme-based and role-played, and we had to take part in. So they did take some time, at least at Temple, to provide us with that type of stuff. And you have a similar experience when you got to the league. But like I say, it's 1 or 2 meetings out of the, you know, the year or so that you're going to be together. So, you know, it's never really addressed thoroughly, I think, until a problem arises.
And that's what just in doing some research, I think it's a big issue apparently in South Africa as it surrounds rugby. And so they have now this policy of responsibility, anti-harassment policy that they've written. But again, the question is, do they implement it? Do they take time for training? Do they really take time to address it so we don't see it realized? I think the problem I have is, you know, when something happens, the media sensationalizes it and then everybody jumps on it and it's a big issue. But the reality is women are getting beaten all day. I think the statistics that I saw, you know, were just ridiculous. 1 in every 3 women, you know, are being assaulted or they are victims of domestic violence throughout the country, you know, even globally. And so if we're not doing something to meaningfully address it, you know, again, firing someone and then just sensationalizing it in the media is not really addressing the problem. It's not really addressing the problem.
I agree. I agree. I definitely think the way it's being portrayed and handled is not productive to the cause, other than being able to bring attention to the cause to people who may not have considered it a big deal otherwise. You know, but like you said, like how does it help the everyday person? How does it help the people? You say 1 in 3 women. That's a lot of women, you know, taking abuse of some form or fashion from guys who will never play on a Sunday for a professional team and do things. So I think that's even more dangerous because, you know, those are the little blurbs you may hear in a news story that we sweep over. You know, we don't necessarily focus on until somebody's murdered. You know, because I know I'm not as familiar with the Oscar Pistorius, but but I know he shot his wife or girlfriend through a door or something like that, and he went to trial. And I remember hearing about it on I think NPR or something like that over the course of the trial, but there are at least, I know back in New York where I'm from, I know of 2 women who were murdered,
right.
Where I grew up, and I don't think it hit the paper,
right.
other than locally or made the news or so, where's the balance or the justice in that? So.
Well, it touched our family.
Right, exactly.
Touched our family.
So very much so. To the point where it's something you hope to get over, but you'll never be the same, and definitely not as highly publicized as some of the more famous occurrences that have been caught on TV now, and then they're spread along. You got the Twitter, the Facebook, all these other mediums to pass along with lightning speed, so everybody can get involved and they enact this real life, reality show in their minds and in practice at dinner parties and such. So I think it's good that these groups are utilizing these incidents to bring attention to it, but I think it has to be done in the right way, and there has to be an interventive, intervening of that sickness and addressed and not only adjudicated, but supported.
Exactly, because we don't want it to perpetuate. And even when you brought up the social media aspect of it, we talk about social media bullying, but there's really domestic violence through social media now, where there's verbal assault that ends up turning into physical assault as a result of the use of social media or abuse of social media. And so just in terms of interventions, certainly there's traditional just counseling and rehabilitation, and I think it would be wonderful if we could recommend that the NFL, or even Pop Warner, Boys and Girls Club really starts dealing with this issue, because it does spill over, as you said, and it might not be domestic violence at that age, but it's anger management. How do you manage your anger? Again, how do you turn it off? How do you speak to a woman? On the football field, you're gruff, and maybe you are cussing and fussing, but when you come back into school and when you're dealing with a young lady, that's not appropriate behavior. And maybe some kids get it and some kids don't. But certainly, if we begin to educate early, then we can maybe catch some of these issues at a later date. So that would be wonderful.
I think there's a lot to be said about etiquette and chivalry and things that I think are not as emphasized in traditional fashions that maybe it was to us early, at least as a kid when I was growing up. Manners and being appropriate and how you presented yourself and represented the family, were values that you had to internalize and display when in public.
That's right.
So I think I can't really address what has changed or what has not changed with that, because I'm not in every household. But I think these are things that need to be emphasized in a lot of athletes that do come from maybe untraditional family structures, whatever that means.
Right.
And to be made aware, because you kind of emulate what you see.
That's right.
So if you're seeing that being the behavior, and I'm supposed to be the man, I'm supposed to be mine, so I got to keep these chicks in check. I got to do whatever the case may be. If that's what you're seeing and that's what you're emulating, how you don't know that it's wrong. The simple way people use certain phrases or certain words to offend certain other groups, and they well, I've been doing this all my life. My parents have been doing this. What's wrong with it now? So it's a plight of ignorance. It's just ignorance of not knowing better.
Right.
So education and information are the quickest cures for ignorance. So we got to get the message out there and then intervene when necessary. Don't let the little incidents build up. To the big ones like that, because could have been prevented earlier. Because I do believe, at least for the Rice family, I think they've learned a great deal. Not the hardest possible way, but in a very hard way that we got to act a little better towards one another going forward. Maybe even Adrian Peterson, in terms of, I guess, how he rears his kids or disciplines them. Maybe he'll pull back a little bit now that his livelihood is in jeopardy and his image has been tarnished. But I think they definitely need help, because I can understand probably the anger that they're feeling right now too, just because I think as athletes we want to win. We're trained to win, we're raised to win, and that's where the conflicts come from in the first place. And then when it doesn't go our way, it's like we're looking for our next time at bat.
Right.
I didn't get you now.
Right.
But I get you next time. And I think until you can address how they get you next time or whatever the case may be, it's going to be systemic and cyclical.
Right. And then again, putting on the pastor hat, I know that there are chaplaincy programs or chaplains in the NFL. Does the chaplain play a role in spiritual support for the athletes?
Oh, definitely. I can't speak to today, but when I played, there's plenty of God running around. You know what I mean? In terms of on the behind the scenes of the organization, there's weekly Bible studies guys attend, prayer groups, Christian athlete fellowships. We got pseudo reverends on the team who are players, older guys, and they embrace prayer at every possible free moment. So there is, there's help there if you want to choose the spiritual path to get it, if you choose to embrace that particular philosophy. I mean, I think there's plenty of opportunity, or at least there was, at least I would say from that Christian perspective. I've never seen a rabbi or an imam or anything, but definitely plenty of Christian stuff going on.
Great. Because certainly God, teaches repentance and forgiveness, but slow to anger. A lot of different things are in the Word of God that can help you center so that indeed you don't allow maybe what's going on, in your mind and in your spirit when you're hitting somebody on the field to spill over into your family life.
That would be, I think, anything that can help. I can speak from experience. That's a tough thing to do, and I think the exposure, like with the Ray Rice and the Adrian Peterson, is the thing that everybody needs. People don't cut up as much when the light is shining on them. It's when they go home behind closed doors when most of this happened. Even the Ray Rice incident, I think he felt there was an aspect of privacy in terms of their conflict, and it went awry because you're not ever alone anymore. But I think that's what those groups, the chaplain groups, more numbers bringing to attention, more people, more eyes. If that's what you're into, I think can be a very positive outlet.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for
this
having
was
me,
an interesting discussion. And again, domestic violence is an issue. Corporal punishment is an issue, and certainly help is available. But this is from Behind the Podium, conversations about law and faith. If you are a domestic violence victim, please seek help. And please always know that God is with you and He is for you. And with God, all things are possible. God bless.